Dawn FM is not as good of an album as some people are trying to portray it as recently. Conversations around Dawn FM have started to rise due to The Weeknd tweeting out his disappointment and fan appreciation towards Dawn FM, albeit in a very comedic fashion. It's begun to beg the question though, is Dawn FM a bad album? Now, in my perspective, it's a good project, but I think that's the wrong question to ask in this scenario anyway. The question I would ask would be, is Dawn FM better than After Hours? And this video is going to discuss why that question is so important. I love you, girl, but I'm out of time. I believe this question around Dawn FM started when there was a Spotify promotion that allowed users to rank their favorite Weeknd albums, which resulted in most fans placing Dawn FM in the bottom tiers. The Weeknd's response to these rankings sparked many discussions surrounding how quote-unquote underrated Dawn FM is within his discography. Many have tried to speculate as to the reason why it didn't perform as well as his other projects, and while there may have been some good points made, I disagree with most of the reasoning. The album failed to meet expectations due to flaws in its release. To say that The Weeknd's album, After Hours, that was released in 2020 was a colossal success would likely be a massive understatement. Many people consider this album to be his best creation ever. Now, if you know The Weeknd's discography, that is incredibly high praise considering the iconic nature of both Beauty Behind the Madness and Starboy. The song Blinding Lights off of the album remained at the top of the Billboard charts for so long that it actually is classified as the greatest Hot 100 song of all time. In fact, the album in its entirety still streams extremely well week by week, as represented in the fact it is the 11th most streamed song on Spotify on a global scale at the time of this recording. For an album well over 2 years old, to still maintain a large number of listeners is extremely impressive and showcases the inherent quality that After Hours possesses. So obviously The Weeknd was already going to have a tough time surpassing the incredibly high standard he had already set for himself. Now, Dawn FM is a good project, like I said before. I enjoy the creative direction that Abel took with a more retro and synth-heavy feel reminiscent of an older generation of music with a hint of modern interpretation. The ideas on this project, as with most of The Weeknd's releases, are super unique and interesting, with this album likely being his most ambitious project to date. Less Than Zero is also a top-tier Weeknd song in my opinion. I'd also argue it's his most emotionally impactful song he's ever created. I'll always be less than zero. Oh, yeah. Many fans have also recently justified the fact that the album didn't do well as predicted simply because the mainstream audience just didn't get it, or that they didn't give this album a chance because it was so conceptually different than After Hours was. I actually completely disagree with that. I think the reason the album wasn't as successful is a lot more down to The Weeknd and his own faults than people are actually willing to admit. My opinion is that the timeline in releasing Dawn FM was fundamentally a terrible decision. As you understand, After Hours was and still is a massively popular album. At the time of Dawn FM's release back in January of 2022, Blinding Lights was still doing well in terms of streams. As well, Save Your Tears was in the Billboard Top 50 at the time. Therefore, because After Hours was still peaking in popularity, I feel it overshadowed the release of Dawn FM. People at the time were still enjoying listening to After Hours. Therefore, they felt no urgency or sense of need to listen to a new project from The Weeknd. No one that I recall was asking for new music from The Weeknd. Not to say that they weren't happy to receive it. My own personal reaction to the release of the album was, oh, okay, cool. And I seriously doubt that type of reaction was what The Weeknd was really going for when he was releasing this album. It's kind of similar if you were eating a Big Mac and someone came along and offered you a second Big Mac. Now, you're not going to stop eating the one that you're already eating to eat this new Big Mac, so you'd take the second Big Mac and put it in the fridge for later. The first Big Mac representing After Hours and the second Big Mac representing Dawn FM. The problem is that some people don't like refrigerated McDonald's, and so they never decide to take the second Big Mac out of the fridge and give it a try. Meaning that if The Weeknd had postponed the release of Dawn FM, it would probably be a much more popular album than it is right now, as it would have given people the time to restore that craving for new Weeknd music. I believe that if Dawn FM had come out either in late 2022 or early 2023, people would have been way more inclined to listen to it, as I feel like the After Hours hype has died down a lot recently, which would have made people more willing to listen to Dawn FM. However, we live in the reality where, instead of getting excited about the prospect of a new Weeknd album, we are talking about an album that already released that is being neglected, which sucks as fans. Now, I'm going to cover two potential counters to my argument, the first being the reasoning behind why The Weeknd released Dawn FM during the After Hours peak. While having a discussion about this subject, it was suggested that The Weeknd had to drop Dawn FM when he did to prepare for his upcoming world tour at the time. Now, to me, that is kind of a non-point. The Weeknd is a big enough artist where he wouldn't need a new album to release to be able to sell at arenas worldwide. As we have already established, his music streams in such high volume that he could probably perform at the same venue for an entire month and he'd have all new people show up every single night. Even if people were sick of After Hours at that point, all he would have to do is add songs from either Starboy or Beauty Behind the Madness and people would buy tickets in droves to see him perform these songs. I don't see the reason why he would need to release an album when he did, and a world tour doesn't justify that for me either. The second potential counter-argument would be that some artists are able to maintain success across multiple projects that all release within a short time span. The best example of this would be Drake, who released Certified Lover Boy in September of 2021, Honestly Nevermind not even a year later in June of 2022, and Her Loss, which released in November of 2022 to round out the trilogy. While all these albums amassed varying amounts of success, I don't think that fans are debating the successes of these albums as much as with an artist like The Weeknd. Drake did his thing, had some catchy songs, and maintained his status as a hip-hop great. An artist like The Weeknd, however, is much more focused on his music having longevity, and that's what is expected of him from fans. Hell, songs from Starboy will sometimes pop back up on the Billboard charts, and that album came out in like 2016. As well with the Drake example, the reason why Her Loss was able to stay afloat even though Honestly Nevermind only came out months beforehand was that Her Loss was overall a much better quality project, and therefore people shifted from listening to Honestly Nevermind to Her Loss without any issue. With The Weeknd, however, not that many people made the jump from After Hours to Dawn FM. So why is that? Well, in my opinion, Dawn FM just isn't as good as After Hours. I once again am not saying that Dawn FM is a bad project. I'm saying though that when it's compared to After Hours, I don't think it's as good of an album. As we've already established, if you're eating a Big Mac and get offered a second one, you are most likely just going to put that second one right in the fridge and potentially never touch it again. However, if you're offered a beef tenderloin from celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay, you're going to stop eating that Big Mac and take that beef tenderloin. So in the case of Drake, the Big Mac would be Honestly Nevermind and the beef tenderloin would be Her Loss. Whereas with Dawn FM, you are eating the Big Mac and being offered something that isn't of better quality than what you already have. What I'm trying to say is that if Dawn FM was a better album than After Hours, I think it would have been able to get out of the shadow that After Hours casted over it. This being one of the reasons it didn't do as well as it could have in terms of longevity. Now, it's very easy to blame the fans for this issue, as after all, fans are the ones who dictate whether a project lives or dies. And since this conversation has started, people have come out of the woodwork to praise the album, labeling it as underrated amongst fans, and just generally projecting negativity about the fact that other fans don't seem to talk about it as much. I don't think Dawn FM is an underrated album by any means. People that have fully listened to the album say it's a good album, so I don't see how it's underrated. Is it underappreciated, however? Absolutely. Now, is it a better album than some of his other projects? I'll let you determine that for yourself. Dawn FM suffers from more than just fan opinion. I genuinely believe that if it were to release today, right now, it would do unbelievably well. Releasing during the peak of After Hours dampened the momentum that Dawn FM could build, as well as the fact that it was not a significant improvement over After Hours. I believe that The Weeknd now has the luxury of being able to take some time away from creating a new album. I think if he were to put a long enough gap between Dawn FM and his next project, it could lead to people retroactively listening to Dawn FM, which could possibly shift it into the spotlight. If he does take a break, coupled with maybe some sort of high-profile romantic breakup, which seems to help him make better music, I think we could be in for some next level musical ability and something that could easily surpass the success of After Hours, more so than Dawn FM.